Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm really excited to share this card that I created using the Big and Bold Jack-o'-lantern stamp set from Colorado Craft Company. I have been a really big fan of the Big and Bold collection from Colorado Craft Company. The stamps are really big, which makes it really nice for trying out different coloring and painting techniques. So to start out my card, I cut a piece of Arches cold pressed watercolor paper to 6x6, and then I put that large pumpkin stamp in my Misti, and I stamped it with antique linen distress ink. I thought that this stamp would be the perfect opportunity to practice my watercoloring. I've never been super confident with my watercoloring skills, but with this particular stamp, I found the watercoloring to be really relaxing and enjoyable and almost kind of easy, and I think that's because of the size of the stamp. So if you're looking for really good stamps for practicing your watercoloring, I would highly recommend checking out the Big and Bold collection from Colorado Craft Company. And actually, the owner of Colorado Craft Company was nice enough to give me a coupon code for you guys so that you could get 10% off and free shipping for the next 2 days on their store. And I'll have information about that in the description down below, as well as on my blog post. Alright, so let me talk a little bit about the actual painting now. So as I was saying earlier, I am using Arches cold pressed watercolor paper, and I do want to say that I think that the kind of watercolor paper you use makes a difference. This is my first time using this kind of watercolor paper, and I saw a definite difference. Normally, I use Canson watercolor paper, which is a more affordable paper, and it does do a good job. It's definitely not a terrible watercolor paper. The things that I found that I really liked about the Arches watercolor paper is I really like the texture of the paper, and I also like how much water and paint the paper could take on without the fibers breaking down. You'll see later as I'm painting the background on this that I put a lot on this paper and it handled it really well. I know if I put that same amount onto Canson watercolor paper, the paper would start to break down because it's just too much water for it, and you'd have little pieces of the paper ripping off of the surface. As for the paints that I'm using, I decided to use Prima watercolors for the pumpkin, and then I do add in a few different colors from my Gansai Tambi watercolor palette onto the background later, but I used all Prima watercolors for the pumpkin. I decided to do my painting with a dry painting technique. With a wet painting technique, you would wet the entire area that you want to paint, and then you would drop in your color and it would kind of spread out to where all the water is. But with a dry painting technique, I'm going right onto the dry paper with my color. This is my first time doing a technique like this, and I have to say I really love it, and I think it's going to make me a lot more confident with my watercoloring. So with this technique, you want to load up your brush with color and then place that color in the area where you want it to be darkest. So with the pumpkin, it's really easy because you want those darker areas to be at the top and the bottom of the pumpkin, and this kind of creates that depth and the illusion that it's round. You would also get some shading in all of those creases on the pumpkin. After you place your color, you want to clean off your brush completely, and then you just want to take clean water on the brush and you drag out that color to the rest of the area, and the further you drag it out, the lighter that color is going to be. And I did this technique multiple times with different colors on the pumpkin so that I would get even more depth and even more color. So the very first color that I did was a very light yellow color, and I did the entire pumpkin and let it dry. And then my second color was an orange, and again I did the same thing on the entire pumpkin, but I did leave a little bit of that yellow showing through. And then finally, the last color that I did was a light brown color. And again, I didn't want to do the entire thing because I wanted those first two colors to show through a little bit. So I did just a little bit on the edges. This card was quite the labor of love. It's pretty much all watercoloring, and I took my watercoloring really slow and I was very patient with it, and I really took the time to build up my colors and add lots of layers. So I think I took about 2 hours on all of the painting for this card. That being said, even with speeding up the painting process, this video is a little bit longer than usual, but I didn't want to leave out any of the watercoloring process for those of you that like to see it. So I am going to turn on some music for some of the painting, and I'll come back later and talk about the background. All right, so as you can see, I've started doing my background, which was actually really hard for me to start because I had just finished that pumpkin and I loved it and I had put a lot of time into it and I didn't know if I was going to do a good job on the background. I could have totally ruined the card if I messed up. So it was kind of nerve-wracking to start the background, but I had it in my head that I wanted this card to be a nighttime scene and I wanted it to be really dark blue. And so I just started and I'm really glad that I did because I love the way that it turns out. I wanted to start out really light and slowly build up towards the darker colors. So I took that light blue color and I painted the entire background, and then I took a darker turquoise color and I added that to be the ground underneath my pumpkin. Now, you might have noticed that while I had that blue paint on my paintbrush, I added some of it to the bottom of the pumpkin, as well as that leaf in the bottom right. This was another really nerve-wracking thing to do because I really liked that pumpkin and I didn't want to ruin it, but I knew that in the scene that I was creating, the pumpkin just needed to be darker, and it also needed some color casting from all of the blue around it. So you will see me going back and adding even more of that blue over the top of the pumpkin as the painting continues. I decided to paint the left and the right sides of the panel really dark blue and then spread out that color so that it slowly gets lighter towards the middle so that I have a kind of glowing look to the background. And you'll see me do this multiple times. I add a lot of layers of this, and this is how I really built up that dark night blue color. I do want to say there was one point while I was making this background that I thought that I had made a mistake and that I had totally ruined this, but I kept with it. And I think that it's important to continue with your painting through to the end and see how it comes out, because you don't really know while you're in the middle of it how it's going to look at the end. These things can transform so quickly that you really just need to stay with it and see what's going to happen, and you might be surprised. And I do think it was one of those times that I had put the blue paint on top of the pumpkin and it got that really green, muddy look and it kind of looked dirty. But I actually think that once all of the painting is done and that background is really nice and dark, that color on the pumpkin is necessary and it really makes it look like this pumpkin belongs in this scene. And I just love the way it all turned out. The rest of the painting is mostly building up that color and getting it really nice and dark. So I'm just going to turn on some music for the rest of the painting. It's just a little bit while longer, and then I will catch you again at the end to talk about how I finish this card up. Once the painting was done, I cut the panel down to 5 3/4 by 5 3/4, and then I popped it up with foam tape onto a 6 by 6 card base. I wanted to add these little glowing lights in the background. These could be thought of as stars, but that's not really what I was going for when I did it. It's kind of hard to explain what I was going for. The best way that I could think of to describe it would be magical. I kind of wanted the scene to have a magical feel to it, and I thought that these lights would add that. So in order to create these glowing lights, I first took a white colored pencil and I colored in little circular shapes in the background. And then I took my white gel pen and I added a little dot to the middle of each of those circular shapes. And then I added even more dots around them. And this really made them look exactly how I was picturing them in my head. I really, really love how it kind of makes the scene look pretty magical. I took that same white colored pencil and I added some highlights to the pumpkin, and then I took a really dark blue colored pencil. I believe this is the indigo blue Prismacolor pencil, and I added some shading to my pumpkin and the leaves, and I also darkened up the drop shadows. For the sentiment, I picked out the stamp which says Happy Halloween, stamped it with Versamark ink onto Bazzill Licorice Twist cardstock, embossed it with Alabaster white embossing powder, and then I cut it down to a strip and cut it in half so the two words are separate, and then I popped up both of those strips onto my card with foam tape. I didn't want to add a lot of embellishments, so the last thing that I did to finish up this card is I took my Wink of Stella glitter brush and I went over those sentiment strips, and then this card was all done. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed the watercoloring and seeing this card come together. All of the supplies that I used to make this card can be found in the description down below, and remember that anytime you click on one of my links, you're helping to support this channel at no extra cost to you. If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I do new videos every single week, and I'm going to be back with another one really soon. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.